deploy, as we'll monitor the opening of that nose cone and the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters required to help stair-step its way to the International Space Station. And now got confirmation that the nose cone is in motion and starting to slowly open at the tip of the spacecraft. So with that, we'll continue to monitor and follow along with the progress of the nose cone and Dragon overall as it gets ready for those 5 major burns required to raise its orbit and catch up to the International Space Station ahead of docking. And speaking of docking, that'll take place on Monday, tomorrow, August 25th. Approximate docking time of around 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 a.m. Central. And of course, we'll have all the live coverage for you starting at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Nose cone is about 25% open as we'll continue to monitor. And of course, the teams in Hawthorne and Houston continuing to monitor. And there we see a great view inside the Dragon as you see that nose cone in motion. As again, it's slowly starting to make its way open to expose those bulkhead thrusters. And again, we'll get the communications once we connect once again, but we'll return back to the views inside of Hawthorne and in Houston. But of course, the team aboard the International Space Station also monitoring today's festivities in terms of the launch as NASA's SpaceX 33rd Commercial Resupply Services mission is well on its way to the station, carrying over 5,000 pounds of science supplies to the Expedition 73 crew. As again, we're continuing to monitor the nose cone that's about 60% open. NASA astronauts Zena Cardman, Mike Fink, Johnny Kim, JAXA astronaut Kim Yui, and Roscosmos cosmonauts Oleg Platonov, Sergei Ryzhikov, and Alexei Zubritsky anxiously awaiting this delivery of over 5,000 pounds of cargo and supplies. And of course, what we talked about earlier in the broadcast, the boost kit that'll be on demonstration. And a great view of the team, the expedition crew that'll be monitoring, both Mike Fink and Johnny Kim. They will be on monitoring duties tomorrow morning. And for Mike Fink, just arrived to the International Space Station on August 2nd as a part of Crew 11. And this past Tuesday, celebrated 400 days in space, his cumulative total, as Fink on board the International Space Station in his 4th flight. As we continue to follow along with the nose cone, as it's about 80 to 85% open as we continue to track here in Houston, along with the teams in SpaceX. We mentioned earlier that there will be 5 key burns once the nose cone is open, and the thrusters are exposed. That first one happens about 45 minutes after launch. That is the phase burn that helps raise the orbit of Dragon. And then the boost burn, close co-elliptic burn, transfer burn, and then the final co-elliptic burn is what's going to set the stage for docking. And that's when the approach initiation burn will come into play. And it looks like the nose cone is nearly completely open. We'll stand by for the call out. And there you heard it as the nose cone has opened, and you see a great view of the curvature of the Earth as the cargo Dragon spacecraft now well on its way to the International Space Station. And again, the docking anticipated tomorrow morning at approximately 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, as the teams both in Hawthorne on the left-hand side and in Houston will monitor the progress and those 5 key burns that'll happen over the next several hours ahead of the anticipated docking time. Now that we have confirmation that the nose cone is deployed and Dragon is ready for those phasing burns to the International Space Station with a successful orbital insertion and launch today, I'm now joined on console here in Houston's Mission Control in the International Space Station Flight Control Room by Bill Spetch, the International Space Station Operations Integrations Manager. Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here.
We discussed key components and objectives for this mission for NASA's SpaceX's 33rd CRS Commercial Resupply Services mission, and one of those keys is the boost kit that is on board the Dragon and in the trunk. Can you explain how this system works and what advantages it offers compared to the traditional reboosts that the International Space Station participates in?
Yeah, of course. So in this case, we have propellant tanks and a couple of Draco engines that are installed in the trunk of the Dragon. Normally, we would have some other external science or external cargo in that trunk area, but for this mission, we put propellant tanks and thrusters. And what that allows us to do is, once it gets to space station, we'll be able to raise the orbit of the space station using these two thrusters that are in the back. And what that means to us is we don't have to use up life on thrusters that are on board the International Space Station. So using a spacecraft that comes up and goes away and can be refurbished or flown anew, you get an advantage of not using the hardware that stays on the International Space Station, as we've been flying for a very long time, as you know.
Now, this Commercial Resupply Services mission also brings a suite of advanced 3D printing experiments, including bioprinting of medical implants, metal printing, and tissue engineering as a part of some of the science and highlights of the research that we featured earlier in today's broadcast as well. But certainly that has a critical perspective on how these capabilities are for long-duration exploration missions, say to the moon and eventually on to Mars. What steps are being taken to scale and take a look at these technologies for deep space missions and its value to be done here closer to home aboard the International Space Station?
Yeah, there are a couple aspects, obviously. So we gain a lot of advantages in microgravity in our 3D printing, especially of tissues and things of that nature that can really help us in medical advances. When you look at like the metal 3D printing, when you get out to the moon and Mars, when you're a long ways away from Earth, and you don't have the same amount of resupply, even on board the ISS, our resupply happens every couple of months, and so we have to fly things occasionally. When you get out to Mars, obviously you can't just fly something up there and have it there. So being able to print out tools or components or anything else that we need is critical for us to be able to survive on the surface of the moon or even on Mars.
And it's exciting to see what's going to come of those research and investigations as they unfold. And I know as Dragon has made its way up to orbit and begins to track down the International Space Station again with the targeted docking of tomorrow morning at approximately 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, with that too, Bill, you talked about the International Space Station and experience in operation for quite some time, celebrating the station's 25th anniversary of human presence this coming November. How do missions like this Commercial Resupply Services mission continue to showcase the station's capabilities and its role in advancing this science, this technology, and the future of exploration?
Yeah, we get a suite of experiments that we get to bring up every time a resupply mission comes to the ISS. We keep it functioning through spares and obviously the supplies for the crew, but ultimately it leads to that research that we get to do on board, and we have been doing for 25 years on board with crew. And what that allows us to do is really advance our knowledge and advance the leading edge of technology that allows us to step out further.
Well, Bill, I know that you and the team, especially those that have been around to see the construction of the International Space Station, anxious to celebrate that milestone. Again, that's coming up November 2nd of this coming year. Bill Spetch, International Space Station Operations Integrations Manager, joining us on console. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And with that, let's check back in with Zach and the team at SpaceX.
Thanks, Joseph. Dragon will now begin its journey toward the International Space Station, executing a series of phasing burns to gradually close the distance, with docking targeted for August 25th at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We'd like to thank NASA for entrusting us with today's mission. SpaceX is honored to be a part of NASA's Commercial Resupply Services initiative. And, of course, congratulations again to the teams on another successful launch. Now, to stay up to date with all of our upcoming missions, be sure to check out spacex.com/launches for schedules and follow @SpaceX on X. We also recently rolled out a new departure board on the SpaceX website that features our upcoming launches, so be sure to check that out. Additionally, you can tune in for the 10th flight of SpaceX's Starship launching from Starbase, Texas later today. The 60-minute launch window for that test flight opens at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, and we'll have live coverage starting about half an hour before liftoff. So that'll do it for me here at SpaceX. Thank you much for tuning in. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Zach. And as always, it's been a pleasure to team up with you and share this launch morning with you as the NASA SpaceX 33rd Commercial Resupply Services mission is well on its way to the International Space Station. Now, we hope you will join us on NASA Plus, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and more for our coverage of the final approach and docking of the spacecraft beginning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, Monday, August 25th, for a docking expected near around 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to visit nasa.gov for the latest updates on our coverage and expected docking times as we follow the operations all throughout the next few hours. With Dragon now safely on its way to the orbiting laboratory, that wraps up this morning's coverage of NASA and SpaceX's 33rd Commercial Resupply Services launch. Until next time, this is Mission Control Houston.